Lots to do today. Lots to do today. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to meeting number 46 of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Pursuant to the order of reference on Friday, December 9th, 2016, Bill C-25, an act to amend the Canada Business Corporations Act, the Canada Cooperatives Act, the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, and the Competition Act. Today appearing before us, we have the Honourable Navdeep Bains, Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, along with John Nubley, Deputy Minister, and Mark Shawn, Director General, Marketplace Framework Policy Branch, Strategic Policy Sector. Welcome, gentlemen. We are going to go right into it. Mr. Bains, Minister Bains, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it really is an honor and privilege to be back here before the committee and to have an opportunity to talk about and address a very important piece of legislation, Bill C-25. I'm here with my Deputy Minister, John Nubley, to my right, and Mark Shawn, Director General, Marketplace Framework Policy Branch, Strategic Policy Sector, to my left. So I'm surrounded with some very intelligent individuals who can address any specific and difficult questions. Bill C-25 covers a lot of important ground. The bill will support efforts to improve diversity on corporate boards and in the senior management ranks of publicly traded companies. And it will improve corporate governance. And I'm delighted that both official opposition parties have expressed support for this legislation. We have already heard some thoughtful commentary on second reading. Many of you have also heard witnesses that have come before the committee as well. And I look forward to discussing this bill with the honourable members of this committee. Je vous donne un peu de contexte sur les raisons.
I'd like to begin with a reminder of the context in which we are bringing forward this bill. Our government is committed to innovation for a better Canada. Innovation will create jobs. Innovation will strengthen the middle class. And it will prepare Canadians with the skills they need for the jobs of the future. As legislators, we have a responsibility to set the ground rules for doing business. And we can create the winning conditions for our citizens and companies to innovate.
Everyone has a fair chance at success. Bill C-25 addresses this goal by making important adjustments to the framework laws that govern the Canadian marketplace. And these laws set out how corporations are organized, and they also promote investor confidence and a competitive marketplace. The amendments in this bill will provide the foundation for how Canadian businesses operate in the 21st century. And they will align Canada's framework laws with best practices in jurisdictions around the world. So there's one key objective or message that I could convey, that this is what this bill is trying to accomplish, is that we truly want to promote best practices in Canada. The first set of amendments contained in Bill C-25 aims to promote greater shareholder democracy. First, the bill will require corporations and cooperatives to hold annual votes to elect directors. Currently, the law permits directors to hold office for up to 3 years before a vote is required. Second, directors under the Canada Business Corporations Act will be elected individually, not as a slate or a group of candidates. And third, the bill will permit shareholders to vote explicitly against a candidate in uncontested elections. The goal is to ensure that the voting process allows shareholders to have their voices heard in a meaningful way. Additionally, Bill C-25 will improve corporate transparency, and it will eliminate outdated instruments of commerce and modernize shareholder communications. These changes will reflect the new norms and practices of a digital economy, and I often tell people now it's no longer the economy, It's the digital economy. And the bill increases business certainty and flexibility. It will allow Canadian businesses to focus on what makes them most productive, efficient, and innovative. Allow me to elaborate on the elements of the bill that addresses diversity in corporate Canada, because there's been a lot of debate and discussion around this aspect. Underrepresentation of different segments of our population and business is a drag on Canada's bottom line. So it's not simply the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. And our government places a high priority on innovation to create better skills, jobs, and opportunity for all Canadians. Regardless of one's gender, or age, or faith, background, orientation, or ability, we want to see every Canadian work to their full potential. In the boardroom, as in life, multiple perspectives can lead to innovative thinking and better performance. As I tell people, good ideas can come from anywhere, anyone. So innovation requires fresh ideas. And research shows that leaders who embrace diversity are more likely to have employees who contribute to their full potential. Notre gouvernement veut assurer la pleine participation des Canadiens qui sont.
Our government is committed to encouraging the full participation of those Canadians who are currently underrepresented in the economy. To that end, Bill C-25 will require corporations to disclose to their shareholders the gender composition of their boards and senior management.
Diversity policies. And those corporations without diversity policies will have to explain why they don't have one. And that's a key component of this bill as well. This amendment is aligned with measures that have already been adopted by most provincial security regulators, and it will apply to all publicly traded corporations incorporated under the Canada Business Corporations Act, regardless of which securities regulator they report to. Mr. Chair, some have commented that the Bill C-25 does not provide an explicit definition of diversity, and I've heard that from individuals, and I look forward to that conversation this morning. That's because our government has made a clear and deliberate choice to understand diversity in the most broadest and most inclusive terms possible. Diversity can include a broad range of skills and experience. It can encompass people from all genders, geography, cultural background, faith, or even people with disabilities. Achieving greater diversity on boards and in senior management is an achievable and realistic goal. Take the Canadian Board Diversity Council, for example. It has established an annual list of qualified candidates who are quote-unquote board ready. And these candidates have a variety of skill sets, experience, gender and cultural backgrounds that could be of great benefits to any board of directors. The objective of this bill is not to be, prescriptive or punitive. Rather, the objective is to mandate open conversation about good corporate governance between companies and their shareholders. It also, allows shareholders to hold the board accountable for how they promote diversity in leadership positions. So it truly also provides an accountability mechanism as well. Bill C-25 is being introduced at a time when many organizations are already looking to recruit more underrepresented groups to the highest levels of corporate leadership, and they're finding plenty of talent to choose from. And if I may digress there for a moment, I've had an opportunity to travel abroad and internationally and within Canada, and I can tell you right now, diversity is our strength. The fact that we have people from different backgrounds available and able to be put forward their ideas in a meaningful way in senior management positions at the board level is a source of competitive advantage for Canada. For example, the Institute of Corporate Directors, along those lines, has a registry of more than 3,500 women who have the skills, qualifications, and training to serve on corporate boards. To make it easier for companies to find the right people, the Institute offers to refer or match companies with suitable candidates. And we really commend this effort. So, the story of, we're trying to find diversity, or we're trying to promote diversity, but we can't find people with diverse backgrounds, I don't think applies in today's day and age. Some commentators have suggested that Bill C-25 should include gender-based quotas. Our government prefers, as a starting point, to adopt the approach taken by the UK and Australia. These countries have been successful in promoting diversity by adopting an approach called comply or explain. And it requires publicly traded corporations to disclose the gender composition and diversity policies among their executive ranks. If they do not have a policy in place, they are called upon to explain why. And that's the concept behind comply or explain. In fact, Bill C-25 is similar to the provisions in the UK Corporate Code, which does not define diversity, but specifically includes gender diversity. And some organizations have proposed voluntary targets to increase the participation of underrepresented groups on corporate boards as well. These organizations include Catalyst Canada and the 30% Club, which promote the advancement of women in the workplace. These organizations are part of a broader movement that includes shareholders, provincial security commissions, and civil society. In fact, support for this bill has come from the Canadian Coalition for Good Governance, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, and the Ontario Securities Commission, just to name a few. With such broad-based consensus, I'm confident that corporate Canada will rise to the challenge of promoting diversity. That said, our government's work does not stop with the passage of Bill C-25. Une fois la loi proclamée, nous allons surveiller les progrès réalisés.
Once the bill becomes law, we are committed to monitoring the level of progress achieved by corporate Canada to promote diversity at the senior leadership level.
Our government is prepared to review Bill C-25. So I've said this in the House, and I want to repeat this again this morning as well. We're willing to re-examine the tools that we have to be able to see meaningful progress. If appropriate, we will consider additional action. Finally, I'd like to address a suggestion raised by some of my honourable colleagues. They suggest that Bill C-25 should address the issue of limiting executive compensation. And I heard this again in the debate in the House as well. In 2014, the Department held extensive public consultations on the Canada Business Corporations Act to ensure that its governance framework remains effective, fosters competitiveness, and supports confident investment. Over 80 submissions were received from a variety of businesses and legal stakeholders, and a wide set of perspectives was given on the issue of executive compensation, raising a number of complex issues that require further study. So as Bill C-25 covers the items from these consultations where views were most consistent, that's the objective. We wanted to find where there was common ground. The question of executive compensation may be dealt with at a future occasion. Nous pourrons ainsi jeter un regard plus éclairé sur les pratiques.
This will allow for a more considered view as best practices and early pilots in other jurisdictions emerge and mature.
To growing the economy, creating jobs, and strengthening the middle class. As such, we are building the right foundation for an inclusive and innovative Canada. We want to foster new thinking by harnessing the full talents and experience of all Canadians. And we recognize, as I said before, that diversity is our strength. Bill C-25 ensures that we create the right conditions, to keep Canada at the forefront of a global economy. And it will provide a transparent and predictable business environment for firms to innovate and grow. Je serai heureux de discuter de ce projet de loi.
I would be pleased to discuss this bill with you. Thank you.
Mr. Baines, and we're going to go right into questioning with starting with Mr. Longfield. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. It's always a pleasure to have you in the room so we can talk about strategies together and have our disagreements around this table, but hopefully help you to inform yourself and your colleagues on best practices as well from our points of view. The way that boards are elected is something that, and first of all, we're looking at kind of the super strategic role that we're playing here versus the strategic role versus local business unit managers or provincial or territorial managers in terms of regulations. But could you maybe talk about what super strategic goals you have in terms of changing the way boards are elected?
So I fundamentally believe that when you look at Canada, we can really create a unique value proposition that will really differentiate Canada when it comes to our corporate governance structure. I really believe this can be a competitive advantage for us. As I travel internationally or even across Canada, it's become very clear that the number one ingredient for our success going forward, particularly in the global context, as you talked about, the economy, the change in scope and speed of technology, the fact that there's a great deal of disruption, the way to deal with that is really investing in our people and talent. And when you look at our, the stats, and the stats are pretty problematic, if you ask me, in the current situation. For example, just to illustrate this point, women hold only 13% of all Canadian board seats, and only 19.1% of those of financial post 500 companies, and yet make up 48% of the workforce. So think about that for a moment. If we were to change that drastically, it would truly provide a competitive advantage for us. And the thinking is, we value diversity, we promote multiculturalism, we have great social cohesion, right? We're a country that's very clear about saying, look, we're open to people, open to ideas, open to trade, open to immigration. How do we leverage that openness and see that reflected at the board level, see that reflected in senior management? And that's not only the right thing to do, but it truly does help the bottom line. There's numerous studies that reflect that. So when you talk about it in the global context, I really think Canada can position itself as a world leader, as an international leader when it comes to corporate governance diversity, when it comes to corporate governance practices. And that's really what this bill is all about. It's really about introducing best practices so we can strengthen what we want to achieve at the corporate level, both in terms of at the board level and at the management level. And I think that really is a competitive advantage for us.
Thank you, Minister. I'm thinking of boards that I've served on. I've been on the boards of a few multinational corporations. I've been on the boards of some Canadian corporations. We've looked at the difference between strategic and tactical is where we always argued at the board table, how deep into the weeds do we need to get to in terms of board governance? And how do we get some of the best practices on governance forward versus how many machines you need in a plant or management decisions. So last meeting we met with some of the department officials, and we were talking about the difference between regulatory and statutory or legal definitions. So when we talked about diversity, how much of that is within regulations and how much of that should be within legislation? And trying to separate out the strategic versus the tactical.
So I agree with your assessment. The objective of boards is to really provide strategic advice to a corporation. The tactical decisions really should be left to management. The idea of a board is to oversee. They have a fiduciary responsibility, and they also look at long-term and short-term initiatives that will help the organization succeed, and they ultimately are there to represent the interests of the shareholders, right? And that's why shareholder democracy is such a key component of this bill as well. I firmly believe when it comes to diversity, for example, what we're trying to do is say, look, right now we want to see diversity better reflected in our governance structure. To put things in perspective, 59% still don't have no written policies when it comes to diversity, when I'm talking about corporations. And 45% of the listed companies do not even have a woman on their boards. So what we're trying to say is, look, we're trying to have a conversation here. We're trying to clearly set a direction on behalf of the government. We're trying to say, look, at a strategic level, you need to really focus on diversity because this is obviously a key area of concern and also an opportunity as well. And I think we're trying not to be prescriptive. We're not trying to create more red tape. We're not trying to create additional hurdles and challenges because the vast majority of these businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises, but we are trying to indicate very clearly to them that they need to move in this direction.
Thank you, Minister. I'm also chairing the co-op caucus, the multi-party co-op caucus. And co-ops and governance also have social goals. They also have environmental goals. One of the corporations that I was involved with from England also had that in terms of board governance of having social and social and environmental goals. During the review period, some of these practices could come forward. You touched on review, but do you have some kind of sense of how frequently we could look at changes to regulations going forward to look at some of these maybe possible opportunities around social and environmental? Yeah,
so I think overall, if you look at the proposals that we brought forward under Bill C-25 are long overdue. The last time we made changes to our framework laws was in 2001. And it's been a substantially long period of time since we brought these changes forward. So I'm very proud of the fact that our government has taken action on this and that we brought these changes forward. Again, I think the committee can speak to the terms of when they, want to see changes reflected in our frameworks, in our laws. Obviously, as I mentioned, there's been a tremendous amount of change in technology. There's been a lot of intense global competition, and therefore we need to constantly re-examine and re-evaluate. From my perspective, particularly when it comes to areas of diversity, I'd like to see meaningful progress in those areas. And so, for example, I think 5 years presents a reasonable timeline where we can reevaluate and determine what kind of progress we made. And then if we haven't achieved the outcomes that we want, then how can we move forward in a meaningful way? What are the tools do we have in our toolbox? That would be a suggestion I would have for the committee, but I would welcome to hear your thoughts.
Great. And that's better than twice every 40 years.
Yeah.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Mr. Nuttall. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. And if I could pick up where Mr. Longfield left off there in regards to outcomes. One of the, to be blunt, one of the criticisms that I've had is of government as a whole, not any specifically at this government, is the lack of measurables that are put in place to determine whether goals have actually been achieved. So, in other words, the bills that we're moving, are they actually having an effect on the problem that's being determined to be there? So my question to you would be, what measurables do you have to determine whether this is a success or not, and over what timeline? So what are your targets, what are your measurables, and over what is the timeline in place on this?
Well, thank you very much for that thoughtful question. Just to put things in context, we looked at other jurisdictions to get an understanding of what their starting point was. So I mentioned our starting point's around 13%, for example, when it comes to women on corporate boards right now. With a 48% workforce, that's just unacceptable. I mean, and I'll explain why in a much more meaningful way, just rather than targets. But specifically on targets, we're at 13%. That's the baseline now. And if you look at the UK, in a few years, in about 3 to 5 years, it was able to double its, for example, representation of women on boards from 12.5% to 26%. Australia went from 10.7% to 22.7%. So we saw that kind of progress over a 5-year period. So I would say based on those experiences, that would be a reasonable range in a specific target for a specific group. But, fundamentally what I think this bill is trying to accomplish, and what I think we need to be mindful of, is we're genuinely trying to promote diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. In order for a corporation, in order for management to really be able to be innovative, to be able to grow, to meet customer needs, to be able to succeed in a changing environment, they need to have critical thinkers and diversity of perspectives and ideas. So one of the key objectives, of course, these numbers matter, targets matter, but if you have true diversity of thought, I really believe that is a core ingredient of success for a corporation or management to succeed going forward, and that's one of the intended outcomes of this legislation.
Thank you. So just to confirm, your target would be 26% roughly, to double over a 3 to 5 year timeline. That's just for one.
No, I was giving you examples of other jurisdictions and the targets the outcomes that they've been able to achieve with the comply and explain model. So I was giving comparable examples.
So what's your target?
First of all, it's not necessarily my target. What I want to genuinely see overall, and fundamentally at the corporate level, is to see society better reflected. So is society better reflected, because if you look at it, some companies have a different situation. So for example, if you're a startup company and you're a few people and you're just setting up, you tend to deal with family members originally or your key investors. So to have a target for them may not be realistic. But as they continue to grow and scale up and become, a more ambitious organization, become more export-oriented, become global, then I would think that they should have better reflection of diversity. So the point I'm making is that I have a macro overall target within the corporate sector. I would like to see greater representation of women, of diverse backgrounds, of people of diverse perspectives. But there's no specific targets for a small business or a medium business. We don't want to create that kind of prescriptive model, but we want to be very clear that we want to see diversity practices put forward. And if they don't, they must explain their position.
So my problem with that, Minister, is this, is that and look, I know your background. You've spent years in the private sector as well.
Yep.
You probably went through change management in your own organizations, and I'm guessing at no time did those change management cultural changes not include specific measurables, because it's just that's the world that you and I lived in. I think that the same type of approach needs to be taken here. So I'm trying to understand, is it at the end of a 5-year cycle, let's say, is it achieved if you go from 13 to 17%? You know, it has and this is one bill on a very large issue and quite frankly, a humongous economy. So, is that an achievement? So.
That's a good question, because what would success look like? Right?
Yes.
And so if we were to examine it 5 years from now, I would say that going to 17% would not be success, for example, to illustrate the point that you raised. But I would say we would also look at where we are versus our international peers. We would also look at, for example, the outcomes we achieved. How are we comparing to our international peers? Are we making meaningful progress? Do we see, a trajectory and a growth rate that's going in the right direction? So those are the kinds of indications I'd be looking for to determine what success looks like. If we're moving in the right direction at a rapid pace, are we getting the right outcomes? How do we compare with other jurisdictions? Those are the types of considerations I would say would be applicable to determine what success looks like. But a modest increase would not be what success looks like.
So I will derive from the answers that since our other jurisdictions allies have moved at about double the pace to double the number over a 5-year period, that would be a good target and measurable for us over the next 3 to 5
I would
years.
say at a bare minimum that would be something that would definitely be reasonable, if not more. I think we can do better. We should do better. And that's why the discussion I had with my colleague there before about re-examining after 5 years, I think that provides ample time period for us to examine and allow corporations, through the process of electing different boards, etc., ample opportunity for them to demonstrate meaningful progress. And if they don't make it, then we come back and we sit down and figure out why aren't they making meaningful progress? What other tools do we have, and how do we continue? Because there's two components, like you said. There's the target, and there's also creating a culture,
Minister, can I just
right?
get
And that's what we want to be able to promote, is this culture of diversity and innovation and inclusiveness.
One more question, and I'm running out of time here. So the Innovation Committee that you appointed has gone around the country. They've done their work. They've brought back a 14-page report. It was put out sometime in December. I've now given it to this committee because it wasn't circulated to this committee. But what
it was made available on the website. It was
right.
was available to the entire public.
What in there is tied specifically to this bill in terms of encouraging the number of women in or diversity overall in boards and throughout organizations to encourage innovation?
Yeah, so I think the number one issue that was raised, and I've mentioned this before in all our consultations with innovation leaders, when we traveled the country, when we met with businesses and different orders of government, was really the focus around talent and people. And so that was clearly reflected in those findings and those discussions with innovation leaders, is that we need to invest in people. We need to really create an opportunity to look at lifelong learning. We need to look at making sure that we promote diversity. And so that's really reflected in the feedback that we received, and it's obviously reflected in the bill that we're presenting. It's all about, again, promoting diversity for better business outcomes, and of course, for innovation as well.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. Minister. Quite frankly, the notion of a 5-year review is absurd. When you look at it in terms of where we are right now and the length and duration to actually pass this legislation and to again review, and then if there's a requirement to look at legislation again, the most likely date is 2023, 2024. And that's if the Parliament of that day, because there will be an election in between, which will also mean that there could be an extenuation of time that goes behind the normal process. You're mostly 2024, if not 2025, and then that Parliament then has to actually make it a priority and start to do that review as well. And if there's amendments, then you're probably looking at another 2 years probably to get it through the Senate and passed. So here we have a situation where 35% of women have MBAs in Canada, and I know that in your previous questioning you mentioned that it would be concern for you that if it went down to 17%, but we're actually at 20% right now, nearly 21%. So that would even be a step back. You didn't mention in your remarks that there are other options. You didn't talk about the quota systems that have been legislated in Norway and France, which have the two highest by far responses, because they're not just done with a big giant push of the button, so to speak. There's working arrangements that go in through those models, and you haven't mentioned those. You did mention a few other nations, and one of them is already lagging behind us. So I guess the problem that I face is the whole issue of diversity is not even, it's a made-up definition that they get to have. So they get that type of a luxury, which isn't often provided luxuries for employers, especially my background being an employer for youth at risk of diversity and also persons with disabilities. And persons with disabilities, by the way, if you don't know, they have 50% unemployment rate, and the margins for that is just totally unacceptable, and it's almost not represented on any board, given there's just a few examples out there. So let's go to the, I guess, the question that I'd like to know is, okay, so company X decides, okay, Mr. Minister, I know now that what you're going to do is you're going to comply and explain. I've got basically to 2024, 2020, more like 26 or 27, depending upon if they really know the parliamentary process. They come back and it's up 1 or 2%. What can you do about it? What specifically can you do if they basically just say that, you know, I don't know if I'll even be around on this board again, especially with the boards that have people moving and coming and going, and like constant education will be a requirement. And so that's satisfying. I find this actually quite frustrating, this entire process, because this is a missed opportunity. I just want to know specifically, what are your powers, are the new minister, because it won't be yourself most likely. Either you'll be prime minister at that time, which will destroy Canadians, but anyway, I'm just joking, or you'll be something else. But the problem is that another minister will have this sitting in this situation most likely, just out of problem. And somebody else like myself will be sitting here asking the question. What can you then do specifically to that company?
Yeah. So again, I first want to thank you for your question and your passion. And I think, you know, I share that passion, and so do many of our colleagues at this table. We really want to see better representation at the board level, and that's why we're pursuing this piece of legislation. To your first point with respects to, you know, the timeline of 5 years, I just want to highlight the fact that once this legislation is put in place, we will see allow companies ample time. As I mentioned, there's a shareholder democracy component to this as well. So we're going from slates to individual election of board, director members, etc. And the idea is we will give them a few years to be able to determine A, what their policies are, and B, better representation. So we got to give them a little bit of runway. I think a year or two might be too tight from my experience of sitting at boards as well, but I would like to hear your feedback on that in a few moments. So I would say that we need some runway to determine what kind of progress they're making. Secondly, with respects to the definition of diversity, you know, I have a lot of confidence in market forces. So if a company does a poor job of promoting diversity, not only will it have a negative consequence or impact on their bottom line, that's point one. Two, their peers who have a better diversity policy and better return on investment for their shareholders will be able to demonstrate that in a tangible way, and that will impact the company significantly as well. So this is not necessarily about what I can do to tell a company with respect to how to improve its bottom line. What I'm doing is creating a market condition where individual investors and shareholders can see, look, this company has a diversity policy. It really takes into account a diversity which drives innovation, growth, and a better return on investment. This company does a very poor job with respect to diversity, and therefore their return on investments are really low. So I think that is a very significant
I know that, but you can't do anything under this legislation, and that's the end result, is that you're neutering yourself with this. I mean,
no, I just explained the comply to explain model, right, has shown in other jurisdictions as well progress.
No, and I've got those
so
examples.
I'm just saying that it's not a policy.
There's nothing you can do. And here's the thing: is if market forces were so good, women wouldn't be right now in the workforce earning 30% less than males.
I'm not saying market forces are perfect, but I say I have confidence.
Well, it's definitely not perfect because we've actually we've required definitions to discriminate against race, ethnicity, and we also pump all kinds of money towards programs every year to try to dissuade that, not only in the workforce but other places, because we still don't have an equal society. Market forces have not ended discrimination by any means of any record in North America. In fact, it's taken legislation to do so. I want to move quickly to, with regards to the safer pay with regards to CEO compensation. The average CEOs made $9.5 million in 2015. Essentially, they eclipse workers, ordinary workers, within days of the new year. Why is it so difficult to get some type of a voting capability in there, given that even CEOs will, say, for example, the CEO of Target, you know, it's a sad story. They came in, they bought up Zellers, which had a modest private sector profit at that time.
You have about 20 seconds left.
Union workers and thank you. And now we have none of those stores, and he walked away with $60 million.
So there's a clear mechanism built into this process, which is all about shareholder democracy. The idea behind that is if you're shareholders and you have issues around compensation for the CEO, you can reflect that through how you select your board members. And so I think that mechanism of accountability is very important. So if I'm a shareholder, as you've raised a concern about compensation for CEOs, then I can make that very clear aspect of who I want to sit at the board to talk about that issue. So there is a process to deal with that through the selection of board members that can hold that can deal with those issues and make sure that they reflect the wishes and the will of their shareholders if that is a concern that they have.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to move to Mr. Arya. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming here. You quoted some figures involving low percentage of women in corporate boards. I have some figures here too. In Greater Montreal area, 37% of the senior leaders are women. In Toronto, Greater Toronto area, 33% of the senior leaders are women, which is good, and we have to still going up. Still, that needs improvement. But when you look at Montreal, for the racialized minorities, only who form 20% of the population, there are only 1% of the leaders in large corporation. Come to Greater Toronto area, where 50% of the population is female, 50% of the population are visible or racialized minorities. And when you look there, racialized minorities account only for 12% of the senior leaders. And when you look at white women compared to racialized women, the ratio is 7:1. I know this bill is good, promoting diversity, including gender diversity, which is a very good thing. But I think we'll be missing a great opportunity here if we don't show the direction to the corporate sector that we want more number of indigenous people, we want more number of visible minorities, we want more number of people with physical disabilities to be part of the senior management and the board. So what do you say about it?
Well, first of all, I'm a numbers person, so I want to thank you again very much for sharing those numbers, because I think it's very important, because numbers tell a very compelling story. There is some modest progress in some of our urban centers within the corporate world, where we're seeing progress with respects to one area of diversity, which is a better reflection of more women in management and at the board level. So there is some modest success there, very modest, but there is some success there that we cannot that we should recognize, as you have highlighted. Just to take a quick step back, I think fundamentally one of the other outcomes and goals of this particular legislation is to really have individuals see themselves in a leadership role, right? If you look at our population, you talk 20% being of visible minorities, for example, and if they work at a corporation and they don't see themselves reflected at the board level, senior management level, that has a huge impact on one's ability to succeed going forward. It really creates these barriers that exist and perpetuates this notion that there's a ceiling, etc. So those are legitimate challenges with respect to diversity as well, not only for the current context, but for future individuals who are entering the workforce as well, of different backgrounds as well. And also, I've always said this as well, and I remember from my experience in the private sector, diversity again is not necessarily a reflection of a checking off a box and making yourself feel good. It's really about how you provide better outcomes for your customers, how do you create a better return on investment? How do you drive better business practices? And diversity is very important for that as well. And I've seen companies that embrace that do really well. But to answer the question specifically around, wanting to see better representation of, for example, in the case you highlighted, visible minorities, that's the whole objective of this piece of legislation. It's in the diversity policy. It's to say, look, we want you to talk about your diversity policy. And if a company does a very poor job and just highlights on, for example, women and excludes visible minorities, Aboriginal people, etc., I think it's to their own detriment, especially when their peers talk about this issue and then are promoting this. So I'm very confident that our government's objective is to promote diversity and in the most broadest terms. We're not here to prescribe diversity with a few key area groups. We're not here to talk about diversity through a narrow lens. We want it to be as broad as possible. It's about skill sets, it's about background, it's about perspectives, it's about the different issues you bring to the table. But the bottom line is, I think the government has shown leadership through this bill to demonstrate that diversity is very important. We have shown leadership that you must have a diversity policy in place, and if you don't, you must clearly demonstrate why not. I think that kind of public shaming, that kind of public accountability for corporations is so important for them to change their behavior, to have better outcomes, to see diversity properly reflected for all the different perspectives that you've highlighted, including visible minorities and Aboriginal people.
Minister, you mentioned that Ontario Teachers Pension Plan and others, there's a bit of consensus on this bill. We had a representative from the Ontario Teachers Pension Board who is quite active and who I think is an expert in corporate governance. And we also had a witness from the Diversity Institute. The Ontario Teachers Pension Plan person said that he needs direction from the government on what to include in the diversity policy other than the gender diversity. He was looking for some sort of direction, some sort of thing in the bill or in the legislation. The same thing from Wendy of Diversity Institute. She too said that we have to include some sort of definition or direction in the legislation. One of the suggestions is that in the legislation, if we can define diversity other than gender diversity, may include the designated groups as mentioned in the Employment Equity Act. Why don't we consider that?
Yeah. No, that's, again, a very thoughtful question. And I know we've had private conversations about this as well, so I'm glad you're putting it on the record as well. But to your point, on the Federal Employment Equity Act, it defines, designated groups as women, Aboriginal people, persons with disability, members of visible minorities. And, for example, even under the Charter of Rights and Freedom, sets out factors of discrimination based on race, national ethnic origin, color, religion, age, or mental or physical disability, just to name a few, and it's not very exhaustive. The point is we already have those benchmarks. The point is it's already reflected in pieces of legislation. But I think diversity goes beyond that as well. As I mentioned, I think those are very important criteria, those are very important factors. But if I'm a corporation, I would go beyond that as well with respect to diversity. So I think that's the kind of imagination, that's the kind of thoughtfulness that we want to see from corporations. Because again, I think this is such a unique opportunity for Canada to really shine and highlight diversity at the most senior level in terms of corporate governance and management, so we can really differentiate ourselves. When I travel now and when I go to China or India, these emerging economies, for example, they're no longer talking about being the jurisdiction of the cheapest products. They no longer want to produce cheap products or services. They want to produce innovative and smart products. In order to do that, they need diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, and a diversity perspective. This is where they look to us with a great deal of envy because of our multicultural society, because of the fact that we promote diversity, because we have social cohesion. So I think that's where I see a real value proposition for us. If we really promote diversity, it will allow us to out-innovate and outthink a lot of our international competition so our companies can succeed. And that's the objective of this legislation.
Thank you very much. We are going to move on to Mr. Dreeshen. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's nice that you're here, Minister, to take some of our questions. The last time you were here, you talked about inclusivity and how important it was, and we were talking about underrepresented groups, and And I think one of the aspects, one of the things we've been trying to discuss is how you can get more training into different areas. You had mentioned 3,500 women that are now part of a pool that one can access. And of course, there are so many other groups, and we had spoken earlier about Aboriginal groups and the great leadership that you see there. So I think that's important. But I wanted to tie this in a bit into our broadband study, because you talked earlier in your discussion on the digital divide and how important that was. So a lot of the training that you can get isn't somebody coming to some university or some corporate board training center to get information. So I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of an update of where we're going with that, how the different institutions can help with training for those that are in more remote centers.
Again, thank you very much for that question. And again, good ideas can come from anywhere, anyone. So, urban centers do not have a monopoly on good ideas, and I think we really need to leverage the expertise, the creativity, and the ingenuity that exists in many of our rural and remote communities across Canada. With respect to the bill specifically, I'll speak to that, and then I'll speak to the Connect to Innovate piece as well. With respect to the bill, it's really about modernizing shareholder communication. So it's really about getting away from a paper-based process and really taking advantage of digital technology and using technology to be able to communicate with shareholders. So I think that's a very important development. As I was talking before, I think that was long overdue. This change is something that I think you'll find consensus and reflected in your remarks as well. And that would allow rural and remote communities as well, individuals from those communities now, if they have access to high-speed internet and broadband connectivity, to be able to get that information in a timely manner and to be able to digest that information in a timely manner and act accordingly. With respect to Connect to Innovate, I think that speaks to our government's overall commitment to saying, look, we need to do a better job of dealing with the digital divide, that every company now is becoming a tech company, that we are part of a digital economy, and therefore we need proper infrastructure to help facilitate meaningful progress and growth in some of our rural and remote regions.
So on the infrastructure side of it as well, I know, and I was part of a conference call that we're getting information on that, but I'm concerned about whether or not we are going to end up losing other construction seasons as we kind of extend all of the required work for this particular infrastructure. So it's the immediacy of the infrastructure associated with that I'm concerned about. Is there opportunities for us to get some information there?
So we extended it by 5 weeks to again deal with some of the challenges that some of the remote and smaller communities were facing in putting together a meaningful proposal. And this is really about our desire to help those smaller, remote, and rural communities. But we're very confident that we can roll this out in a timely manner, that we can see not only meaningful investments in the short term, but long term as well, and also leveraging other investment opportunities. So this fund that we put forward is a $500 million initiative from the federal government. But when leveraged with the private sector potentially, we believe it can easily be up to about $1 billion. And that's a significant investment to probably 300 to 400 targeted rural and remote communities that will benefit from that. And we obviously want to take advantage of the construction season, and we obviously want to see this rolled out in a timely manner, and we're working on this, and this is a priority for our government.
C25 also speaks to a number of other items, and so basically we've been talking about the diversity of boards at this point in time. But we also talk about the prohibition of bearer shares certificates and bearer share warrants, and where that is going to go. I wonder if you can touch on that, the technical aspect of it, and the rationale for doing this, and how deep you plan on getting into analyzing whether or not that is successful.
You have about 30 seconds.
Okay, so very quickly, and then if we have another opportunity, I'd be more than glad to. And if you're not happy with the answer, feel free to email myself or my office, and we'll be more than willing to provide you with a more thorough and detailed answer if you require. But basically, bearer shares are recognized as a convenient mechanism to facilitate money laundering, and that is really the issue that we feel is at hand. It's an outdated way of dealing with shares, and so we have been very explicit about eliminating bearer shares because of that primary concern. And we again can provide you a technical detail of how we plan to roll that out. But again, thank you for that question.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we're going to move to Mr. Sheehan. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'll be splitting my time with Manjeet as well. Well, first of all, Minister, thank you very much for presenting to us this morning. It was very informative. And during your presentation, you talked about various groups, that could be defined as being, involved in the diversity. One of the groups that you talked about was age. And my question is going to be around how Bill C-25 might engage young people or get young people involved, because young Canadians, they transcend a whole diverse group of people. So in your opinion, the changes that Bill C-25 bring about, will they be beneficial to engaging young Canadians?
I hope so. I am very familiar with the university and colleges model, where they have a board of governors, right, for example, and in that board of governors, they have representation from the student body. But if you look at corporations, I think they need to be very strategic and thoughtful about identifying young individuals who have, certain expertise, understanding of technology, trends, understanding of certain tastes and aspirations of a certain market segment. Because that's so critical. Companies need to be forward-looking. They need to develop long-term plans. They need to have an understanding of where the market is going, where the trends are going, where the opportunities exist, and to have someone who is younger, who is potentially tech-savvy, who understands the changing dynamic a bit differently than some of the individuals in a different age segment, I think brings in that diversity of thought that I was talking about, that diversity of perspective. And it's also very empowering for young people as well. And I think to have that kind of dynamic and dimension is really important. And it speaks to really what our Prime Minister has done. Our Prime Minister is the Minister of Youth. He fundamentally believes in empowering young people, and he's created a youth council that he often engages, he often works very closely with to get their ideas. And just recently in Calgary, I met with his youth council to talk to them about their views on innovation, their views on the economy, their views on government. And it's incredibly impressive to hear their thoughts, their perspectives, often that not heard at in the House of Commons, for example, or often not heard with your traditional stakeholders. They bring a very unique perspective. They have a lot of energy. And they think in big terms, and they think in a longer term perspective. And I think those are the kind of qualities, those are the kind of attributes we need to see more of at the board level. So I'm hoping when we talk about diversity, that's a dimension that companies really understand, appreciate, and really focus in on, because I think it'll really create opportunities for them going forward. And at the same time, it empowers young people, which is a win-win situation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Minister, welcome. In your opening remarks, you talked about investor and shareholder confidence. Typically, shareholders balance risk and reward and use indicators such as earning per share. Can you shed some light or rationale that this bill will use, or you, in considering this bill, will use to increase investor shareholder confidence in this matter?
So I think, investors are always looking for areas of a good return. They're looking for a stable return on investment. They obviously want to see companies that are robust, that have earning growth potential year over year, that are innovative, and that understand market trends and can succeed going forward in the long run. And so in order to do that, there have been numerous studies, there's been a fair amount of literature and data out there that demonstrates companies that are more innovative succeed. They reinvent themselves, they understand market trends. In order to be innovative, you need to be creative, you need to think outside the box, you need to think differently, you need to have a unique perspective. And I think in order to achieve that, you need to really promote diversity. And you can't simply have that diversity at an operational level. You need to have that diversity at a senior management level, and at the board level. And so I think that's what this bill really does well. It really promotes that idea of diversity of thought, as I said, diversity of perspectives, and diversity of experiences that will really allow companies to be more innovative. Especially now, the scope and speed of change is phenomenal. The number of companies that are basically becoming irrelevant because their business models are outdated, and the number of companies that are emerging because they're finding new, unique opportunities are growing at a much faster rate than we've seen in the past. And so that kind of disruption and change really requires diversity at the forefront for companies to succeed, to drive their innovation agenda. And ultimately, that leads to better return on investment. So I think investors look for that. And I think this is clearly an area that's not only good for corporate Canada, but I think it's good for Canada in general as we brand ourselves internationally as a destination that really promotes, again, our people, our ideas, promotes diversity.
Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes left, but I'm mindful of the time. I'm not sure if the minister has an extra 10 minutes or if he...
So, Chair, I just wanted to mention I'd be more than glad to accommodate. I just have a cabinet meeting to go to, but if it's a few more minutes, I'm more than willing to accommodate.
Okay. Sorry?
We started late, too.
No, we did not. You arrived late, sir. I was here on time.
No, I was.
Okay,
I was here
on time. We started at 8:45.
No, I was here
Mr.
on
Lowe,
time.
And I was here on time
sitting in
as
a seat as you were
Mr.
up
Massey,
the front.
we're wasting time. We're going to move on. Mr. Lowe.
You're going to allow the minister just to intercede here on the floor then? Is that, I'm actually a committee member and was addressing that issue.
We could waste, I'm trying to get you your time on the floor. So if you want your time, I'm trying to make that happen for you. Mr. Loeb, you got 5 minutes.
Minister Bain, in the legislation it says a company shall have a diversity policy. Is that your interpretation of the legislation? It shall?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Pardon me?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Could you repeat that again, please?
That it shall have a policy? Diversity policy?
Yeah. If it does not have a diversity policy, but it should have a diversity
And if you shall not have one, what happens?
then you must explain to your shareholders why you don't have a diversity policy. So that's the concept behind the bill.
And then what? And then after that, what happens?
Then ultimately, I think the shareholders would put enormous pressure on the board, on its management to ask, significant questions at its
Okay, but
general
the flaw,
meetings.
I think the flaw in that argument is that some of the largest shareholders in corporations are also corporations as well. And so you're asking someone who probably doesn't have a policy to enforce it on someone who doesn't have a policy. My question to you is, why, if the government is so bold and we have a feminist prime minister and everything like this, why not say by 2018, every publicly traded corporation on the TSX will have a diversity policy, and any company that is wishing to issue an IPO, I just use publicly traded companies as my example, any company that is doing an IPO must have a diversity policy before it does their IPO. Why not start there? Something bold.
So I think when we formed cabinet and we had 50% women in our cabinet, that was a bold statement made by the Prime Minister.
This isn't dealing with cabinet makeup in a government.
But if I
We're
can
talking
explain to
about
you,
your
sir,
bill.
with all due respect, you asked me a question.
Yeah,
have
you
to
didn't
allow me
answer.
Well, allow me the opportunity
Thank you.
to answer.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So when you're talking about being bold and setting an example and changing the culture, I think we at the government level have demonstrated that.
Then why not do it in the bill?
Sir, again, you're not allowing me the answer.
Well, filibuster. You didn't answer the question.
Well, you're not allowing me the opportunity, sir.
Go ahead and try again.
I will do my best. If you keep on interrupting, it may be a bit tricky. So as I said, the government and the Prime Minister led by example when we put forward a cabinet that reflected 50% women and 50% men. With respect to this piece of legislation, again, we're demonstrating very clearly by showing leadership of how important diversity is. Not only did we have diversity in terms of the distribution between men and women, we had people of diverse backgrounds also in our cabinet. So this piece of legislation makes it very clear that diversity is very important. Again, the decision is ultimately made by the shareholders. They determine, right, if they're happy with the diversity policy or not, and they will put the pressure on their board and on senior management because they understand that this will have an impact on their return on investment, this will have an impact on their shareholder earnings, and I think that mechanism is very important, and that's what we're here to promote.
Is it that much to ask a corporation to put a diversity policy?
That's exactly what we're doing.
But you're not putting any targets? You're not putting any dates on it? You're saying they shall? They shall. Well, you shall.
We are asking
and then,
organizations
by the way,
to have
report back to your board of directors and see if they shall do anything. Well, maybe they aren't doing anything. If you look at the publicly traded companies that have a diversity policy, not very many of them have a majority of women on their boards, do they?
So again, this is exactly what the bill is trying to accomplish. It is saying, look, you should have a diversity policy, and if you do not have a diversity policy, then you must explain why not. And putting that kind of pressure on a corporation clearly will change behavior, and we've seen this in other jurisdictions.
Well, other jurisdictions have put targets on it, so we can differ on that. The other one I want to talk on here briefly is the say on pay. Okay, Mr. Massey alluded to this. We see some executives with obscene payouts, pensions. Hunter Harrison would be a great example of one with obscene payouts. And why shouldn't shareholders have a say on somebody that walks away with hundreds of millions of dollars. Why not do that? Be bold. Who would argue with that? Certainly not the workers in this country.
I do believe shareholders have a say when they select their board of directors, and their board of directors ultimately select the CEO or president.
But let's go back
and
to who
so
the shareholders are, Mr. Baines.
So
the
again,
shareholders that do the voting are not grandma.
Chair, I'm trying to answer a question.
Well,
Every time I'm trying to answer a question, he
then I'll tell
interrupts
you.
me. No,
the shareholders of these companies are not grandma and grandpa down the side road. They are shareholders of equity companies, mutual fund companies that also have their senior executives receiving obscene salaries, pensions, and payouts. So why not government put some clamps on this and bring it back into reality that respects the worker and respects the investor that does live on the side road that has no say? Why not that?
Well, I'm glad to hear the Conservative Party now is caring about workers, and I'm glad to hear that they're talking about shareholders, and I'm glad to hear that you're talking about the middle class. But I can tell you right now that we've been very clear that there's a mechanism in place to hold accountable with respect to CEO compensation to the board level. And shareholders have the ability to determine that. And these shareholders are individuals.
Well, you're putting the wolves in charge of the hen house, sir.
But that is time up. Final 2 minutes. Mr. Massey, keep it tight and brief, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will. I think, though, it's important to note that we haven't talked about beneficial ownership transparency. That's an important part of this. It's money laundering in Canada. In fact, more money laundering is taking place in Canada because we're known as basically a safe haven. In fact, what's taken place is snow washing is now described as a common element internationally. And it's ironic that the Minister of Finance said, quote, at the G20 summit, "We won't rest until we make sure that we're not only in compliance, but that we're doing a very good job understanding who owns what assets in our country, understanding what taxes people owe." And that's what Morneau said. I guess maybe it's a definition of work. And rest might be the ones that challenge here, because certainly given the Panama Papers and that, this would be an excellent opportunity to have writing beneficial ownership transparency measures into this bill. We don't have them. In fact, the Toronto Star did an expose on what's taking place. Money laundering, as you know, is related to terrorist activity. It's related to drug trafficking, embezzlement, a whole series of things. So it also, lastly, is inflating the Toronto and the Vancouver housing market. There's several aspects of that. So my question is, what exactly enforcement is provided here, because I see nothing really related to that, and why is the government so reluctant to that instead of following through on the commitments to the world?
Again, thank you very much for that question. As you talked about, tax fairness, including issues of tax evasion and avoidance, is a central pillar of our commitment to the middle class Canadians. We've mentioned this on numerous occasions. And our government took action last April by investing actually $444 million.
Okay, you know what? I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, he's talking about investment. This is how ridiculous it's gotten, and I think this is important to note. Okay. He's talking about investment.
Mr. Massey,
he's talking about.
Mr. Massey,
it's my time.
No,
he's talking about investment of the previous actions as a specific thing in a bill, and this is why. This is why this is news. He's talking specifically about a bill question, and he's talking about his government investment.
Minutes while we go into camera for our committee business. Thank you. Thank you for presenting to us today. And we'll be back in 2 minutes, please.
Mm-hmm.